Hi guys, Matt Easton here. So this is just a little video directed at Skallagrim, actually, because I just watched one of your videos about your new crossbow you got. Congratulations on getting a Todd Stuff crossbow. They're pretty freaking awesome, and I have to say they're definitely on my wish list as well. At some point I'll definitely get one of those, although I'm tempted to get one of the big kind of 1,200 pound draw weight windlass crossbows when I can afford it, just because, like, why wouldn't you get one if you can afford them? So they look like a lot of fun. So I'm looking forward to your future videos, and your current ones, in fact, are very interesting about crossbow. You raised one point in that video which I thought it kind of gave me an idea, so I rushed out here and thought I'll do a quick little video response. You mentioned about the very short span of the bow, the power stroke of the medieval crossbow as opposed to a modern crossbow, and this is this is actually something I've been meaning to talk about for quite a while, and I've never really kind of got round to it, and I don't have a crossbow to demonstrate, but a big difference, and something that most people are not aware of, and actually Todd of Todd Stuff has kind of actually pioneered the kind of reproduction and kind of experimenting with medieval type crossbows. But one of the big differences between obviously a modern crossbow, as you know, and a medieval crossbow is modern crossbows often you draw the string back from the resting position. It moves kind of, you know, about 12 inches or so on modern crossbows, sometimes really long. On some of the compound crossbows, very long power stroke, and of course the longer the power stroke, the more energy is being transferred to the arrow or the bolt, and therefore the more bang for your buck you're getting out of the power of the prod or the bow. But with a medieval crossbow, it's very noticeable, with all of the surviving examples pretty much, that the power stroke is very short, usually only about between sort of 5 and 6 inches, I think, is about the average from what I've read, from what Todd has said. And you know, the question comes up of why was the power stroke so short on medieval crossbows when they could have got more power into the bolt by having a longer power stroke. And I think that the answer is actually to do with their trust in the materials. And the thing, and this is where it kind of comes, this is why I'm making a video about it, because the thing that a lot of people are not necessarily aware of is that whilst they had relatively good quality steel, for example, in the medieval period, it wasn't as homogeneous as modern steel, and it wasn't as, you couldn't scientifically test it in the way, you know, before you hardened and tempered it in the way that you do with modern steels. So, you know, this is one of the reasons why, of course, certain blade making centres, Solingen, Toledo, Milan, and you know, obviously Damascus steel became famous for producing blades of very reliable quality, and most places in the world simply couldn't do that. So I think one of the possible and perhaps even probable reasons why they didn't have a longer power stroke or a longer draw on medieval and Renaissance crossbows is because they didn't trust the materials that they were working with. And when you're dealing with a 1,000 pound draw weight crossbow, when it breaks, it can be quite catastrophic, I understand. If one end of the bow breaks, you're going to get suddenly the bowstring and the broken end of steel is going to either, it might fly off away from you, but it might fly around and hit you in the face. So I think the consequences of a bow that's under an enormous amount of tension suddenly breaking, especially if you're in the process of loading it, I mean, it might just take your head off, quite literally. So I think that is, I think that's a major point. And then you might say, okay, well, what about the composite versions, the versions which use wood and horn and sinew in the bow? And I think it's a similar thing with them, because if you were going to make a really long power stroke, a really long draw, you would need to make the bow really long. And obviously having a crossbow with an immensely long bow on it is not very practical. And in fact they did exist, obviously, in certain parts of it, I believe in China, but equally in the ancient world, in the Roman period, they did have kind of siege giant crossbows that did have very large bows on them. But if you're having a handheld crossbow that you're taking around with you, I think it's not very practical to have a large bow on it. So if you're going to make a very compact bow, You can't make one that you can draw back a very long way because it would simply break. But you can make something that's very stiff that you don't draw back a very long way. So I think that's really what it comes down to. I think it comes down to the fact that whether you're using a composite bow or a steel bow, the practical way of doing it safely in the medieval world is to make a very stiff and very thick bow that you don't draw back very far. And I think it comes down to their trust in the materials. So there we go, and that does of course relate to swords as well, because there is an argument to be made, and I won't say, there is quite a well-known researcher, and I won't say it just in case he's going to publish this as a theory at some point, but there is something to be said about the design of medieval swords and the improving metallurgy that was possible in Europe at that time, and the fact that changing shapes of swords is not only to do with opposing armour or what's best for certain fencing techniques or whatever, it can be down to the technology of the metal as well. And the fact that rapiers, very narrow blades, became very popular in the middle of the 16th century onwards might perhaps be related to metallurgy of the period as well. It's not necessarily only due to changing fencing practices or dress codes or whatever else. It can be sometimes to do with the quality of the material, and we know that lots of medieval swords contain a lot of what's called slag, which can lead to the weapon catastrophically failing during use, and modern steel doesn't have that problem. So there we go. I hope that's useful to you, Skal, and everybody else watching. Cheers guys!